Hello YouTube, hello everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Doctor Who Fridays, where I am joined by Couqui Pirate, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, and a newcomer who's never been on either of my podcasts before, Quenrich. Quenrich, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us something about yourself?
Hello. I'm a Finnish something, just a random guy who, well, never mind.
Okie dokie then. Right, well, this was, we've just watched the two-parter Edge of Destruction. Two-parters are something of a rarity in classic Who, but I suppose the actual runtime is about equivalent to a modern series episode. I just remembered that Doctor Who Man, who appears on the Omega Files, I think actually once said that this was his favourite First Doctor story. So I'm starting to think I should have asked him to come on and sell it and say all its sort of great points. But anyways, I'd seen it before. Quenrich had seen it before. Couqui Pirate, once again, your first time viewing this story. Any particular thoughts that stand out?
The moral of the story is that error screens are important. And while any sort of futuristic civilization wouldn't have a kind of interactive error screen is beyond me. Or at least that's the moral that we should get out of it. I think there's the moral that was attempted to be communicated, which is not such a nice moral. I think there are two parts. Women are these apparently irrational, temperamental creatures, but that's okay because sometimes we need these irrational women, even if they're hard to deal with. At least that seems to be the message that was communicating. Susan was in perpetual shit-flipping mode, which is actually pretty much a staple of her character, really. You know, the door is open, I touched something and it hurt, and I'm throwing a snowball at you, and, you know, granted, some of these are genuine moments of shock, but it seems as though she only has sort of, you know, regular and shit-flipping emotional sets. But I've already poked fun at the acting. But, yeah, then you have, Barbara, who, okay, the Doctor accuses primarily Chesterton, but Barbara as well, of sabotage. And then Barbara goes off, and Chesterton goes to the Doctor and is like, you should apologize to her. You know, it kind of... I feel as though this episode was really built on a certain set of, I guess, gender norms.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, and it was really just sort of reinforcing them, but trying to make them seem like they're a good thing, which, I don't know. At least that's what I got out of this primarily.
Yeah, well, the bit that struck me was when the Doctor is convinced they're all going to die. It's like, we, the two men, stand and face death together. But don't let the poor things, you know, the poor women know that they're going to die. It's kinder for it to happen without them knowing. Which I think, in fact, that attitude even extended in those days to hospitals. That if a man was terminally ill, he'd be told, and there were actually, I don't know if it was ever actually a policy anywhere, but you'd actually let a woman, you know, die from their illness or injuries without actually knowing that they were definitely facing death. You know, so it's just seen as kinder to what they genuinely saw as the weaker sex. As for Susan flipping out, one of the most memorable moments, and I think it did get complaints at the time, is with the scissors, which actually even reminded people of Psycho, which, of course, Psycho was a new movie at the time, don't forget. As for poking fun at the acting, there are some moments where, as we've discussed before, that very theatrical style is there. I'd say, yeah, there was some... Maybe Carol Ann Ford as Susan was a little bit over the top in this one. And Ian had maybe some weak moments. Hartnell's theatrical style of acting I really like, but it's very, very certain characteristics are quite typical, I think, of actors of that generation.
Actually, it reminds me of, and it was sort of semi-fourth wall breaking, though he's not explicitly speaking to the audience. You know, when he's expressing his excitement about the formation of a star. Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, the fourth wall was definitely a lot thinner in the classic era of Who. Yeah, so Quenrich, I don't know if this is the first time that you saw this episode for a while, but generally, what do you think of this story?
To be brutally honest, I think this episode might be the dumbest serial ever. All that logic and overacting and the theatricalness, and the best thing in this episode, the best moment was when Susan touched the controller and got a shock, apparently. That bit of overacting was just wow.
I love how she flinched after she fainted, too.
Yeah.
Well, I think this episode had some saving graces. While I think it probably exists because they had to fill 2 more weeks and didn't want to spend more money on sets, you know, nowadays we call them bottle episodes. You just use what you have. Observations that occurred to me that some around is things like Susan. This is the first time we've seen her change her clothes. So all the business with Coal Hill School, with the junkyard, with the cavemen, everything that happens on Skaro, and presumably the Skaro, the whole Dalek serial takes place over a few days. And of course she's in that cell. And you know, all that she's been through in however long, and she doesn't change her clothes until now. It's just, it never really struck me before, but it's sort of like she's still wearing that dress. Which, if you actually look at the new series, Name of the Doctor, she apparently was already wearing that when they left Gallifrey.
Oh. Wow. I did not notice that.
Yeah. But I suppose they did that so that you'd recognise in the long shot that Susan walking ahead into the capsule ahead of the first Doctor, and so they got a double to wear that exact dress. But I think we would have worked out it was Susan. I think it would have made more sense if they'd worn more Gallifreyan-type clothes and bought... Oh, mind you, they said that the TARDIS has an extensive wardrobe. Oh, and also they presumably don't go straight... No, they can't go straight to Earth in 1963, can they? Because they reference other adventures prior to that. Anyway, that's a bit off topic.
Considering, on the same topic, considering Susan's personality, you'd think that she'd have at least changed her bottom, her trousers or bottoms a bit more regularly.
Definitely, especially after she met Aladon. But, oh dear, sorry, this is meant to be a family podcast. So, God, 8 minutes in and we've already gone to toilet humour. That it all came down to a broken spring on a switch is a bit much. That was a bit kind of, I don't know quite what to call that. It was all that drama was caused by one faulty switch, you know, that there are some good kind of atmospheric things about the episode. One thing I can't get out of my head because the docudrama Adventure in Space and Time reminded me of it, and I don't know if I don't think this outtake actually exists, but I think I'd heard about it, so it's obviously something people remember. Is sometimes they do cut out William Hartnell's mistakes, and there was actually a part in recording this episode when he was supposed to say fault locator, and he actually said fornicator.
Okay.
Yeah, you kind of have to cut that out, really. Apparently the everyone laughed, and then it was a bit difficult to do the retake because everyone's remembering when he said fornicator. So check the fornicator! And so, people at home, don't forget to check your fornicators regularly. And what else is there to say? What this episode does is introduce, albeit now I look at it, there are some rather clinky, kind of contradictory things, but a lot hadn't been decided. You kind of get the impression from this episode that although this is, technology of the Doctor's people, you still kind of get the impression that he built this, or it's maybe, in the same way that people like, maybe, put together antique cars in their garages as a hobby, and maybe fiddle. I think it's a very customised thing. Whereas New Doctor Who, it's sort of like every TARDIS has a soul. There's also references to TARDIS as being grown, not built. This is an electromechanical machine, and the Doctor seems not to know that the TARDIS can think already. And of course, if you look at the new series, a TARDIS is a completely sentient entity, which is why when I've made this card, having obviously avatars for characters to represent us lot, guess what? I've included a certain new series character, because as I see it, she is a character in this episode. Although I suppose you could argue that she's a character in every episode of Doctor Who.
Well,
yeah, you know who I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I was gonna say that when that line came up, I'm like, wait, you mean he doesn't know about sexy yet? And it's just like, But yeah, it's interesting how the TARDIS was very, I don't know, everything was different. What remains the same though is that the Doctor still has no idea what he's doing with that thing. And I suppose that's something that's kind of funny, the whole. I kind of imagine those little image macros with dogs by controller panels or something. I have no idea what I'm doing. That's. I think that's part of the Doctor's charm, is that he has this amazing machine and he has no idea how to work it. And apparently, just such contrived explanations like it took time from us and now it's giving it back. Apparently, that kind of troll logic applies with the TARDIS. By the way, I thought that was interesting. The message was that's an irrational sort of theory to make, but the TARDIS is not a rational entity, and that's why a woman was able to understand it more. Or am I reading too much into the gender roles in this? I feel like that's what they were trying to communicate with this episode.
I think that's there, but I don't think they set out, because these people would have taken, everybody involved, the writers, everybody would have taken those sorts of attitudes so for granted that it wouldn't even be a message you'd try, and it's just the norm, it's the standard. That's part of the fascination with 60s Who, is trying to see it through the eyes of the original audience, and nobody would have batted an eyelid. I think you'd even a feminist watching it in 1963 would have there'd be so much of that sort of attitude on television that you wouldn't really notice. But yeah, it's interesting. The thing about the Doctor not knowing, sometimes in the new series the Doctor doesn't know, like in Boomtown, when Margaret reverts back to being an egg, or the TARDIS turns Margaret into an egg to give her a second chance at life. The Doctor seems to be speculating, like, maybe the TARDIS can read unconscious thought. And I remember thinking, wow, and that's the 9th Doctor. This Doctor is over 900 years old, and still, working these things out. And Quenrich, anything else to add?
Yes. One thing I noticed in this episode is that there is slight ageism in the old series, at least when it concerns Susan. Even though, if I recall, she is supposed to be 16.
15.
15. Well, in any case, she is portrayed as really stupid. at 15, I was stupid, yes, but not really. I didn't need someone to explain to me how a button might get stuck.
Well, yes, I think maybe the thing is they wanted a kid, and she is called a child, and obviously I suppose maybe in those days you were treated like a child for longer, because yeah, I mean I can see why in the when they remade the two first Dalek stories for the big screen, they cast a 12-year-old as Susan. Kind of made more sense. There's a big difference between a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old. Yeah, but I think the idea of having the kid is to have someone to explain things to, but you're actually explaining it to the audience, many of whom would also have been children. And perhaps they should have had somebody younger than 15. Obviously, Carol Ann Ford was a somewhat older than 15. I don't know. Because Carol Ann Ford, the actress, complained because William Hartnell, who I suppose was, getting on a bit and not terribly well, did actually see her as a child. So there was no difference between how the Doctor treats Susan and how William Hartnell, the actor, treated Carol Ann Ford in real life. He looked at her and he saw this silly teenager who needs everything explained to them, and which again came across in the docudrama. But yeah, Carol Ann Ford. I mean, Carol Ann Ford was always disappointed because she was told that her character was going to be psychic, which the unbroadcast pilot, which is basically it's almost identical to the first episode that we saw, Couqui, that was broadcast. One of the things they changed was they cut out Susan apparently being able to see into the future with ink blots. And apparently that the way that she made the ink blots and all that scared people, or Sidney Newman looked at it and thought that this is too creepy or whatever. But she was supposed to develop, and also because Carol Ann Ford had ballet training or something, she was a very physical actress, and she was actually meant to develop into more of an action character who'd maybe know some martial arts or something. And, sorry for the spoilers, Couqui, but they never actually did that. The writers didn't know how to write her that way. She was a silly little girl, albeit an alien.
This just seems like a huge waste of character. I mean, I wouldn't feel so bad about, that scene where she's, warning the Doctor not to touch the button, and the only way she could do was, flailing out, going, ah! Had I known that, later on she develops into a stronger character, but apparently that doesn't happen. Well, I wasn't really expecting it to happen anyway, but yeah, that's a bit of a bummer.
Yeah, it was meant to, and it's actually the reason why Carol Ann Ford left the series. I won't spoil it anymore by telling you when, but she actually did an interview in the past few months, I think around the time of the anniversary. But yeah, she got sick of her character, and the character wasn't what she was told it was going to be. I'm desperately struggling to think of other things to sort of say about this episode, which it's, I suppose, after Shakespearean Cavemen and after the first ever Dalek serial, this is a kind of a bit of a letdown. It's not, it's only 50 minutes of your life, but it doesn't really measure up. Our expectations are quite high when you've had the Cavemen and the Daleks. And this maybe it feels like a bit of a filler. I suppose there is character going on. I do like the fact that we're at this point where there's still a power struggle. The characters don't all trust each other. Ian and Barbara are still these people who'd really rather just go back home and live normal lives. Which again is quite a contrast. Because new series, people are generally, with very few exceptions, people are generally ecstatic to have the chance to travel on the TARDIS. Whereas here it's sort of we've been kidnapped by this nasty old man. I have to say, I am looking forward to Marco Polo. The only trouble there is, of course, that it's a telesnap reconstruction. But I'm sure we'll get through it. It's also another 7-parter, so it's as long as the Daleks. I'm just rambling now. Does anybody have anything else to say about the Edge of Destruction?
The water pouches were kind of cool.
That is true.
I like that. I mean, I was kind of expecting it to be a water cooler that you leave the cup there and it fills up, but it drops a pouch, which I'm sure at the time looked incredibly futuristic, right?
Mm.
Also, the automatic doors, I mentioned before that it was with the switch, so it's not quite automatic, but this time they were automatic. They only operated in the exact opposite manner that an automatic door is supposed to operate. That is to say that it closed when you got close and opened when you got away.
Yes.
It seemed a lot like the TARDIS was just trolling them.
Like, if this were on a modern gen system, it would be like, it seems as though you have this button continuously pushed down. Would you like to enable sticky keys? And you always say, no, I don't want those darn sticky keys, but at least you know that a button's being held down too long.
Yeah. It is quite something that the TARDIS would go on to become this organic, self-repairing, pretty magical thing. At this point, it's still electromechanical and something can go wrong that easily, But yeah, I am visualizing Sexy or Idris, whatever we call her, just imagining her laughing. Like, I really fucked with them with these doors, haha. Yeah. So,
Bad wolf, man.
Of course, yeah. Another thing, actually, the bandages, the bandages the Doctor has, that's pretty cool as well. Because remember, it changes colour to indicate that the wound is healed.
Yeah, I like it when they try to imagine, like, what stuff of the future is going to be like. Also, a fourth universe. That is something.
Yep.
Do they expand upon it all? Can the TARDIS travel between, like, parallel worlds, or is that just something they bring up and never establish again?
There are alternative universes, yeah. If you remember, of course, there are in the new series, because in the new series, the first Cybermen we see were from a parallel world.
Yeah, but the TARDIS couldn't operate in those. The time the Doctor had to give up years of his life to make it move again.
That's true. There's also the pocket universe that the Doctor's wife takes place in, which is kind of like, or do you say bubble universe? But I mean, there is a place called, it's a long way off, but there's another universe or dimension or whatever called E-space. It's not a parallel universe or reality in any way that I understand. And there's an antimatter universe as well, which we go to. But those were actually 70s, so we're at least 10 to 15 years away from those. I don't think, actually, I think there arguably is a 60s example. But is it another universe, another dimension, or another reality? Because there's in the Whoniverse there's such a thing as outside reality, which I guess you'll see it when we get to it. I'll tell you what. As we are now three serials in, we've all Quenrich wasn't with us, but we've all seen them. What are people's general thoughts about the Hartnell era so far?
8 out of 10 would bang.
Okay. Quenrich?
I'd say 6.5 out of 10 would go to a theatre with.
I don't know what I would give it, because I mean I think the first two serials are so good, and I can be completely immersed and look past any of the sort of problems, Personally, I would say I think that the the first Doctor, Ian, Barbara, and Susan era is one of my favourite eras in Doctor Who history. In fact, all of the Ian and Barbara stuff. But when I watch these things, I take anything old-fashioned. I just take for granted. I just kind of accept it really. And yeah.
I do have one question, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
Since I haven't seen any other old serials but the Hartnell ones and some few from other Doctors, does the acting get better?
The acting style changes so that I mean they're more natural in the 70s and then yet more natural still in the 80s. So it's just a question of, at this point, that to be a television actor wasn't a job in the UK in 1963. So these, as we discussed in the previous podcasts, they're shipping these actors in from the theatre. Hartnell and William Russell, who plays Ian Chesterton, have a bit of screen experience. And Jacqueline Hill, who plays Barbara, was mainly a model who did some acting. So, a lot of the bit parts, like we talked about the not bit parts, but supporting cast, like the Cavemen and the Thals, you can see that they've come straight from the theatre. You can see that it's in between repertory Shakespeare plays. But I personally appreciate this style of acting. It's just you have to accept it's a different school of acting. It's a different type of acting.
Fair enough.
So better isn't really. So the more natural kind of acting that you're used to from modern TV. Well, modern TV shows are made like movies, so it's kind of a different kettle of fish. And
Except
that's another thing.
for soaps.
Except for soaps. But yeah, I mean these guys barely get to do retakes unless you do actually accidentally say fornicator or something, So yeah. Okay. Well, I tell you what I'm going to do then, because there's not much more to say about this episode. We've talked about the era. I'm going to ask, what are people's expectations of Marco Polo?
Well, stuff like Marco Polo is actually, when you talk about, that's what made me particularly curious about Old 2. The idea of, historical fiction that is mundane, that it doesn't have to involve Van Gogh being tormented by an alien. So, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. If they handled it like the Caveman arc, then I feel like I'm looking forward to a treat.
Aha. Actually, yes, a point there, of course, about the pure historical. Of course, obviously, the Cavemen stories technically are prehistorical. I think, which is even rarer. And yeah, so we're going to be meeting historical figures for the first time. As I say, it's a shame that it's all a reconstruction because it's missing. We think somebody might have it, but I'm not even going to open that can of worms. That's a sore point in the Doctor Who fan community. And also, actually, of course, we've only met 2 alien species at this point in Doctor Who. Off the top of my head, I can't even think where we meet when we meet the next aliens. We've had Thals and Daleks. This episode, obviously, it's sometimes known as Inside the Spaceship. I just remembered that. Edge of Destruction is sometimes just called Inside the Spaceship. Which I suppose you can't say it's false advertising. So, Quenrich, have you ever seen what there is of Marco Polo?
That one I skipped when I watched the first 2 series of Doctor Who, so I haven't seen this one.
Ah, okay. Well, as I say, it'll have to be a Teddy Snap. All the audio is there, but but the rest is Teddy Snaps.
That is basically the reason why I skipped it. I thought I tried it, but then it bored me.
This is the trouble. Teddy Snap reconstructions are worthwhile. Some people aren't bothered. You, James, actually said he basically just listened to them as audio dramas and had them on in the background or doing something else. And that they basically, with very few exceptions, because obviously Teddy Snap reconstructions, they'll sometimes have writing on the screen or whatever. Some of the missing stuff has been animated, though, either professionally or by amateurs. And actually, sometimes the style of animation is really, really cool. There's one by a kind of famous Doctor Who, like a celebrity Doctor Who fan called Ian Levine, used a really good program to animate Mission to the Unknown, which is a kind of Dalek prequel, which we'll be coming to in a few weeks. It's a prequel to an epic, to a Dalek epic. And obviously it's got the audio from the original episode, but is wonderfully reconstructed, and that's actually even on YouTube. I wish they'd do animations for more of the missing episodes, though ideally, of course, they'd find the bloody things. But and of course, this time, when we get to certain missing episodes of the Troughton era, well, what I mean is there'll be fewer missing episodes than if we'd done it a few months earlier. So that's cool. And if you haven't seen Enemy of the World or Web of Fear yet, this will be your chance. I must admit, I have definitely seen a reconstruction of Marco Polo, but not recently. The Beginnings box set actually consists of the untransmitted pilot, Unearthly Child with the Cavemen, the Dalek story, the one we just watched, and a reconstruction of Marco Polo, where, as far as I can recall, the guy, Derek Handley, was asked to get it down to half an hour, which is quite absurd, really. I might have misremembered this, but like a 7-part serial, but broken down to its nuts and bolts to be just like a half-hour thing. But I guess we're committed, I don't know if I'll be able to find that or not, but I guess we're committed to completistism. So all 7 parts reconstructed, which I dare say we'll have more to say about it than we had to say about Edge of Destruction. Does anybody have any suggested topics or closing thoughts?
Compare this arc to the Brian and Stewie episode of Family Guy.
Weren't there loads of Brian and Stewie episodes?
No, it's an episode called Brian and Stewie.
Ah, okay. Well, what actually happens in that?
They are trapped in a bank vault over a weekend.
Oh, I have seen that. Okay.
No cutaway gags, just getting paranoid about one another, revealing each other's true feelings. It explores this same topic, only it involves a talking toddler and an anthropomorphic dog.
I see. Okay. So basically, look, it's a bottle episode with just a regular cast, and you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just nothing to get excited about like in the past couple of weeks. Quenrich, any closing thoughts?
Unfortunately, no, none.
You just have nothing to say about it.
Nothing to say. Yeah.
Well, okay, so this one didn't go down too well, but at least it was only 50 minutes, you know, so equivalent to if you watched a not-so-good episode of the new series. It wasn't 6 or 7 episodes of not much to talk about. Okay, well, there you have it, folks. Join us for the next Doctor Who Fridays, where we will be talking about Marco Polo. And it's a good night from Quenrich.
Good night.
And good night from Couqui.
The Hamster of Prosperity would like to remind you that the yellow snow is lemon-flavored.
Yummy. And it's good night from me. Oh, sorry, I meant to end on next episode, Marco Polo. Diddle-a-dum, 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 woo-wah-woo.